Welcome to part 3 of chapter 9, Adolescent Cognition. I'm only going over a couple of slides here. We're going to briefly look at Piaget's fourth and final stage from his cognitive development theory, and then we will talk about adolescent egocentrism. You can read about information processing on your own in the textbook, and there is also a final section on schools I will not be covering. You can also read that. So let's begin with Piaget's theory, and we are reaching its final stage, the fourth stage, and we call this the formal operational stage. Piaget said this happens at 11 years of age or older, so you can put 11 plus. And this stage is more abstract than the previous concrete operational stage. So more abstract. Remember when I talked about the third stage, the concrete operational stage that was happening in elementary school years? The children at that, in those ages, could use logic now, which meant that they were operational. So operations are logical mental abilities. But remember, they were tied to the concrete world. They could only use logic on when they were engaged with concrete objects or pictures. Their logic applied to what they could see and touch and hear in the world around them. Now we're moving beyond that in the formal operational stage. So it's more abstract, meaning that adolescents can think about make-believe situations. They can imagine hypothetical events and use logic about their hypothetically imagined events. They engage in abstract propositions, so they can think about logical propositions. If A is larger than B and B is larger than C, then A must be larger than C, and they can totally make sense of this in their heads right now as a proposition that's not even tied to any specific objects or things, but just as a concept. So because of this new abstract and hypothetical type of thinking, it is during adolescence that that you start thinking about things like higher powers and perhaps religious thoughts of God or other beings, other potential religious beings, and maybe thinking about more about things like ideal parents and how are your parents not the best parents? How could they be better? I mean, like these are things that wouldn't enter a child's mind. They just would accept what is and what is in the concrete world around them. But adolescents let their minds fly, and this is what separates this stage from the previous. It is now their thoughts can now uh, uh, go to concepts like democracy and justice, and much more so than they did in childhood. They have increased verbal problem solving ability. They think about thought itself. They explore how their mind works. They think about their memory. They think about control how they control their thoughts, and they have thoughts, as I was mentioning, about idealism and possibilities. What would the best parents be? Or what would what would be the best job to have? Perhaps a young adolescent will make the decision that they're only going to work at jobs that they love. For instance, that'll be their idealistic thought. And they're certainly more logical. Piaget said that they engage in hypothetical deductive reasoning. They can create a hypothesis and deduce its implications. Um, Younger children are more likely to solve problems through trial and error. You give any kind of complex logical problem to a child, and they will take some stabs at it, at trying to solve it. The adolescent will sit there and think about, okay, it, there's this method or there's this method. They will think about possible approaches to the problems. They will then kind of choose what they believe is the best way to solve the problem, and then they will follow that path towards solving it. So actually, let me just read what I have here and make it more formal. Formal operational thinkers develop hypotheses about ways to solve problems, and then systematically deduce the best path to follow to solve the problem. And this is the hypothetical deductive reasoning. Like little scientists, like experimenters, this could be the solution or this could be the solution, and which one, it makes more sense to follow. And what you see with children is they'll just dive into the first kind of path they think of, the first attempt that they can imagine to solve a problem. Okay, and that's what we're doing with Piaget. There's a section about evaluating his theory. I'm going to leave that for you to read on your own. I don't really need to cover it for you. And that'll take us to adolescent egocentrism. So this is following Piaget's theory, because remember, we introduced the term egocentrism back when we looked at Piaget's second stage of development, his pre-operational thought stage, where we were talking about preschool age children. And if you remember, at that point we talked about how they were very egocentric. They believed that everyone would see the same thing, or everyone would have the same ideas in their minds, and so they would hold something up to show grandma while they talked to her on the phone, and they would cover their eyes when they hide. So we saw that was egocentrism at the preschool age. Well, a researcher named David Elkind, E-L-K-I-N-D, David Elkind, he came up with this idea of adolescent egocentrism. He said that egocentrism reappears in a different form during adolescence. And he speaks about two different types of adolescent egocentrism. We can define the adolescent egocentrism as a heightened self-consciousness in adolescence. The two types are imaginary audience and personal fable. Both of these should be familiar to you somewhat if you think back to your own adolescence, and some of you may just still be finishing your adolescence. But the imaginary audience is the idea that everyone is noticing you. That you are on stage in a sense. People are interested in watching you, and they notice what you're wearing. And if you have a bad hair day, they all notice it. And if you have a pimple on your face, everyone sees it. And it's that heightened state of, oh my goodness, if I go to school looking like this, everyone's going to talk about me, or everyone's going to notice it. And in some cases, because of this heightened sense of awareness that you believe everyone's watching, it can lead to attention-getting behavior as well. You believe that if you do something funny, everyone's got a good chuckle of it. Everyone was, even if they didn't laugh out loud, everyone was watching you. And so we believe during adolescence that we're noticed much more than we actually are. And many experiments have pointed this out. There was, just to name one, there was an experiment done in the past where they had subjects wear a Barry Manilow t-shirt to school. I don't know about now, but back in my day, Barry Manilow was not considered cool among adolescents. And so this was meant to be kind of an embarrassing shirt to wear. And they asked these adolescents, after they had worn the shirt to their schools for the day, how many people did they think noticed it, or what % of their classes noticed it? And then they actually asked others, if they noticed what shirt he was wearing, and he or she was wearing. And anyways, the estimates were so far higher than the actual truth. And people, the subjects believed that most people had noticed this shirt. Most people had seen it and recognized what it was. And in actuality, it was a very small % of people that noticed the shirt. And so great discrepancy between what reality is and what we believe as far as how many people notice us. Okay, so that's the imaginary audience, and it certainly affects our emotions throughout adolescence, particularly those bad days where you have bad hair days or pimples or whatnot. The second part of egocentrism in adolescence is the personal fable. This involves a sense of uniqueness and invincibility. It is. I'm going to take each of those terms separately. So it involves a sense of uniqueness, and that shows up as the feeling that no one could possibly understand you because of the life that you had lived, that you have such a unique, background and history of your life. No one has lived a life like mine. And so, like, you, because of your uniqueness, adolescents tend to feel that they understand others more than others can possibly understand them because of their complex life that they've lived. Oh, John, he's easy to understand. I get him. He's this way and that way, but John can't possibly understand me because I have such a complex backstory. And anyways, and so we often feel that our lives are somehow special, but we're living a fable. Um, and it should make sense, why that's so. I mean, we have limited information on others, and we use that to make sense of and to understand them. But when we think about what they know about us, we know that there's so much that they don't know about us, and so we feel like we're more complex. But we don't take into account that there's so much we don't know about them either. Anyways, the second part is the invincibility part. This is part of the fable as well, that we are invincible. That it's very common in adolescents to not think that you could possibly be injured or die or suffer some negative consequence. So if you adolescents have feelings like I won't get pregnant, or even though I took a chance, or I won't catch a disease just because I didn't wear a condom. I can drive at high speeds much better than others can. So it's okay if I speed, or I can text while I drive just fine. I know it's wrong for others, but I'm really good at it, so I can do it and nothing will happen to me. Or I can drink a little and drive, and because I'm very aware, and this or that, and it's that we are different than others. These we're not going to get in an accident. We're not going to be we're not going to catch a disease from having unprotected sex, or get pregnant. Um, so the feeling of invincibility is that bad things are what happen to other people, not not to yourself. Um, okay. Finally, as this is this last point here, a recent study found that greater use of social networking was linked to a higher level of narcissism. Um, and there's been a lot of research into whether or not the current generation is more narcissistic, it's, believing in their own importance. I mean, we're in an age of where we take selfies and we post them online, and we post things that we see and do, and people post pictures of the food that they eat, and like it seems like a heightened sense of personal importance. Everyone's reading my Facebook, page, and or my Twitter feed. People are following me, and they were interested in everything I write and everything I put there. And so some people believe it's greater than ever in the past because of social networking and the platforms available for others to follow one another. Um, uh, we've always had cameras, but selfies were never a thing in the past, and it really has come about as in conjunction with social media. That we will take pictures of our lives and of ourselves as we live. Okay. Anyways, that ends chapter 9.